The stars above Earth had never looked so terrifying as they did on that cold November morning when the Verith Dominion arrived with their war fleet of 3,000 ships that blocked out the sun and cast shadows across entire continents. General Zorath Vulcan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Conqueror's Pride, and he looked down at the blue planet below with a mixture of curiosity and contempt that he had felt many times before when conquering lesser species across the galaxy. He was a massive creature who stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 powerful arms and scales that covered his body like plates of black iron. His eyes glowed with a deep orange light, and his teeth were sharp enough to tear through metal. He had conquered 200 star systems in his long career, and he had never once lost a battle. "Open a channel to the planet below," he commanded in a voice that rumbled like thunder. And his communication officers rushed to obey their general without question or hesitation. The message went out across every frequency and every screen on Earth displayed the face of General Zorath as he spoke his challenge to the humans below. "People of Earth," he began with a smile that showed all of his terrible teeth. "I am General Zorath Vulcan of the Verith Dominion. I come to offer you a choice that we have offered to every species we have encountered." He paused to let his words sink in before he continued with his ancient speech. "Our empire follows the sacred tradition of Cathalar, the trial of champions. Your planet may send up to 100 of your finest warriors to face 100 of my own champions in honorable combat aboard my ship. The species that wins will rule, and the species that loses will serve. This is the way it has always been, and this is the way it shall remain." On Earth, the world watched in terror as the alien general delivered his ultimatum. Leaders gathered in emergency meetings and military commanders analyzed the alien ships with growing despair. The technology gap was enormous, and everyone knew that a direct war would mean extinction for humanity. The United Defense Council met in Geneva within hours of the broadcast, and representatives from every nation argued about what they should do. Some wanted to fight with everything they had, while others wanted to surrender immediately to avoid destruction. But there was a third option that nobody expected. Admiral Chun Wei of China stood up and spoke in a calm voice that silenced the room. "We have studied the Verith traditions through the data they broadcast with their challenge," she said, "and we have found something interesting. The Cathalar has very specific rules about numbers and combat, but it says nothing about requiring us to send exactly 100 fighters." "What are you suggesting?" asked President Morrison of the United States with confusion on his face. "I am suggesting that we send one," Admiral Chun replied, and the room erupted into chaos. "One fighter against 100 alien champions," shouted General Petrov of Russia. "That is suicide. That is surrender with extra steps." But Admiral Chun held up her hand and the room slowly became quiet again. "The Varith respects strength and martial prowess above all else," she explained. "They have never seen a species confident enough to send just one warrior. It will confuse them, frighten them, and most importantly, it will make them underestimate us." The debates lasted for 3 days while the alien fleet waited in orbit with growing impatience. Messages came from General Zorath demanding an answer, each one more insulting than the last. He called humans cowards and weaklings and creatures not worthy of his time. Finally, the United Defense Council reached a decision that shocked the entire world. Earth would send one fighter. The announcement caused panic and outrage across the planet. People marched in the streets, demanding that their leaders reconsider. News channels ran constant coverage with experts arguing about whether this was genius or madness. Most believed it was madness. General Zorath received the news on his bridge, and for a long moment he simply stared at the message with his orange eyes wide in disbelief. Then he began to laugh, and his laughter echoed through the corridors of his massive ship. "One fighter," he roared with amusement. The humans sent just one fighter against my 100 champions. This is the greatest insult and the greatest joke I've ever witnessed." He ordered his communication officers to broadcast his response across the galaxy, so that every civilized species could witness the comedy. "Attention, all who are watching," Zorath announced with barely contained laughter. "The humans of Earth have revealed themselves to be the greatest cowards in galactic history. They send one warrior to face 100. One. They are not worthy of conquest, but I will honor our traditions and destroy their pathetic champion anyway." Across known space, alien species watched with amusement and placed bets on how long the human would survive. The Mindari gave the human 10 seconds. The Krethnok gave 5. The Varaxians simply laughed and said the human would die before the battle even started. But on Earth, the preparations were already underway in a secret military facility buried deep beneath the mountains of Colorado. Commander Alara Vance stood in a small room and looked at herself in a mirror as she prepared for the mission that everyone believed was impossible. She was 42 years old, with short gray hair and scars that crossed her face from decades of combat. Her eyes were dark brown and showed no fear, only a cold determination that had carried her through countless battles. She had been a Special Forces operative for 20 years before joining the classified programs that nobody talked about. She had fought in jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands. She had killed with guns and knives and her bare hands when necessary. She was, by every measure that mattered, the most dangerous human being on the planet. "Commander Vance," said a voice behind her, and she turned to see Admiral Chun standing in the doorway. "It is time for your final briefing." Alara nodded and followed the Admiral to a conference room where a team of scientists and military strategists waited with holographic displays showing everything they knew about the Varth and their champions. "We have analyzed the data from previous Kethalar battles," said Dr. Sarah Park, the lead xenobiologist. "The Varth champions include warriors from 20 different conquered species, each selected for their combat abilities. You will face Varaxian berserkers who feel no pain, Mindari psychics who can attack your mind, and Krethnok juggernauts who stand 12 feet tall and can crush steel with their bare hands." Alara studied the information with careful attention and memorized every weakness and vulnerability that the scientists had discovered. "What about the arena itself?" she asked in a voice that was steady and calm. "The Kethalar takes place in a massive combat arena aboard the flagship," explained General Morrison. "The terrain shifts and changes throughout the battle with platforms, obstacles, and environmental hazards. It is designed to test every aspect of a warrior's abilities." Alara nodded slowly as a plan began to form in her mind. "I will need specific equipment," she said, and she began to list the items that would give her an edge against impossible odds. The next morning, Commander Alara Vance walked across the tarmac toward a small shuttle that would carry her to the alien flagship. She wore a standard combat suit with no special enhancements or power armor. She carried a sidearm on her hip and a duffel bag over her shoulder that contained everything she needed. Thousands of people had gathered to watch her departure, and many of them were crying because they believed she was walking to her death. But Alara did not cry, and she did not show any fear as she climbed into the shuttle and prepared for launch. As the shuttle rose into the sky and headed toward the alien fleet, General Zorath watched from his bridge with an amused smile on his scaled face. "One human," he said to his officers with a shake of his massive head. "The cowards of Earth send just one human to face the greatest warriors in the galaxy. This will be over before it truly begins." He had no idea how wrong he was. The shuttle docked with the Conqueror's Pride, and Commander Alara Vance stepped out into a corridor that was bigger than any building she had ever seen on Earth. The walls were made of dark metal covered with alien symbols and trophies from conquered worlds. and armed guards with scales and weapons lined both sides to watch her pass. She walked with her head held high and her duffel bag hanging from her shoulder as if she were taking a casual stroll through a park instead of walking through an enemy warship. The guards looked at her with confusion and contempt because they could not understand how such a small creature could show no fear. A tall alien with purple skin and 4 eyes stepped forward to greet her with a mocking bow. "I am Vexinar, the arena master," he said in a voice that hissed like a snake. "I will escort you to the Kethalar grounds, where you will meet your end, human." "Lead the way," Alara replied in a calm voice that made Vexinar pause for just a moment before he turned and walked deeper into the ship. They traveled through corridors and elevators for nearly an hour until they reached a massive set of doors that were decorated with images of battles and victories from centuries of conquest. Vexinar pressed his hand against a panel, and the doors slowly opened to reveal the most incredible arena Alara had ever seen. The Kethalar arena was the size of a small city, with floating platforms at different heights and obstacles scattered across the battlefield like a deadly maze. There were pits filled with burning plasma and towers that crackled with electricity, and walls that moved and shifted without warning. Holographic screens floated in the air above the arena, so that spectators could watch every moment of the combat from perfect angles. And there were so many spectators. Thousands of aliens sat in elevated viewing platforms that surrounded the arena, and they all turned to look at the single human who walked through the entrance. Laughter spread through the crowd like a wave as they pointed at her and made jokes in languages she could not understand. At the far end of the arena, on a throne made of the bones of fallen enemies, sat General Zorath Velkan, with his forearms resting on the armrests and his orange eyes burning with amusement. He rose slowly, and his voice boomed across the arena through speakers that made the air vibrate. "Welcome, human," he announced with a theatrical spread of his arms. "Welcome to the Kethalar, where your pathetic species will learn the price of arrogance. I must admit that I'm disappointed. I expected at least a few warriors to entertain my champions, but your coward leaders could only spare one." The crowd laughed again, and Zorath let them enjoy the moment before he raised his hand for silence. "Let me introduce you to your opponents," he continued with obvious pleasure, and he gestured toward a massive gate on the opposite side of the arena. The gate opened with a grinding roar, and 100 champions marched out in perfect formation. They were monsters from nightmare and legend, each one selected from the best warriors of 20 conquered species. The Varaxian berserkers came first with their red skin and muscles that bulged like mountains. They wore no armor because they felt no pain and they feared no weapon. Their teeth were filed to sharp points, and their eyes were completely black. Behind them came the Mindari psychics, who floated above the ground with their pale blue skin and oversized heads. They did not need physical weapons, because their minds could crush a skull from across the room or fill an enemy with terror, so intense that their heart would simply stop. The Krithanok juggernauts stomped forward with footsteps that shook the ground. Each one stood 12 feet tall and weighed as much as a small vehicle. Their skin was like stone, and their fists could punch through the hull of a starship. There were also Scythian blade dancers with 4 arms and swords that moved faster than the eye could follow. There were Morvith hunters with camouflage skin that could make them nearly invisible. There were Draxi warriors with natural armor and claws that could cut through metal like paper. 100 champions, each one a legend in their own species, each one responsible for countless kills in previous Kethalar battles. They spread out across the arena and formed a half-circle around the entrance, where Alara stood alone with her duffel bag. General Zorath leaned forward on his throne with a cruel smile. "Human, I offer you one courtesy before we begin. You may choose how you wish to die. Do you want to face my champions one at a time, or would you prefer to fight them all at once?" The arena fell silent as everyone waited for her answer. Some aliens whispered bets about whether she would beg for mercy or simply collapse from fear. But Commander Alara Vance did neither of those things. Instead, she set down her duffel bag on the arena floor and slowly unzipped it while every eye in the arena watched with curiosity. She reached inside and began to pull out her equipment one piece at a time. First came the compact explosives, small enough to fit in her palm, but powerful enough to destroy a wall. Then came a modified rifle with attachments that no alien had ever seen before. 6 combat knives followed, each one designed for a different purpose. Medical stims that could keep her fighting through injuries that would kill a normal person. A thin wire garrote that was nearly invisible. And finally, a warm paperback book that she set aside gently as if it were precious. The aliens watched with growing confusion because they did not understand why a dead woman would take time to organize her belongings. Alara stood up straight and looked at the 100 champions before her without a single trace of fear in her dark eyes. "All at once will be faster," she said in a voice that echoed across the silent arena. For a moment, nobody moved. Even General Zorath seemed frozen on his throne as he tried to process what he had just heard. This tiny creature, this fragile human, had just chosen to fight 100 of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy at the same time. Then Zorath began to laugh, but this time there was something different in his laughter. There was a tiny seed of doubt that he could not quite explain, a small voice in his head that whispered a warning he did not want to hear. "Very well, human," he roared as he stood up from his throne. "You have chosen your death. Let the Cathalar begin." A massive horn sounded, and the champions charged forward with weapons raised and war cries echoing off the arena walls. Alara grabbed her rifle and ran toward the nearest platform, her feet moving with the speed and precision of someone who had trained for combat her entire life. She fired 3 shots without seeming to aim, and 3 Mindari psychics fell from the air with holes in their oversized heads. The Varaxians reached her position first, their black eyes hungry for blood and their clawed hands reaching for her throat. But Alara was no longer there because she had already rolled to the side and thrown a knife that buried itself in the eye socket of the lead berserker. Explosions echoed through the arena as she triggered the charges she had thrown while running. A group of Scythian blade dancers disappeared in fire and smoke before they could even swing their swords. The crowd stopped laughing. General Zorath slowly sat back down on his throne as he watched the impossible scene unfold below. The human was not dying. She was not begging for mercy. She was fighting with a ferocity and cunning that he had never witnessed in all his centuries of conquest. "What manner of creature is this?" he whispered to himself as another of his champions fell to the human's deadly accuracy. The Cathalar had only just begun, and already the Varth Dominion was learning a lesson that would change the galaxy forever. Humans did not fight fair, and humans did not know when to quit. The battle raged across the arena in a storm of blood and fire that nobody in the Varth Dominion had ever witnessed before. Commander Alara Vance moved through the chaos like a ghost, never staying in one place long enough for the alien champions to surround her. The Krethnok juggernaut named Breakthrough thundered toward her with fists raised high and a roar that shook the platforms around them. He was the largest of his kind, and he had crushed over 50 enemies in previous Cathalar battles. He believed that killing this tiny human would take less than a second. But Alara did not try to fight him with strength because she knew that would be foolish. Instead, she waited until the very last moment and then dove between his massive legs, while jamming a knife into the nerve cluster behind his knee. The xenobiology reports had told her exactly where to strike, and she had memorized every weakness of every species she would face. Breakthrough screamed in pain and confusion as his leg collapsed beneath his enormous weight. He crashed to the ground like a falling mountain, and Alara used his body as cover while she fired at the Varaxian berserkers who were charging from the east. "She fights without honor," screamed one of the Scythian blade dancers. "She uses tricks and deception like a coward." But Alara did not care about honor. She cared about survival, and she cared about winning. Humans had learned long ago that honor was a luxury that only the victorious could afford. 3 Mindari psychics floated above her and unleashed their mental attacks with everything they had. They expected to find a mind like the other species they had faced before, a single stream of thoughts that could be grabbed and twisted and broken. What they found instead made them recoil in horror and confusion. The human mind was nothing like they expected. It was chaos and noise and contradictions all happening at the same time. Alara was thinking about the battle while also thinking about a song she had heard as a child, while also worrying about whether she had left her stove on back home, while also calculating firing angles, while also remembering the taste of her grandmother's cooking. The Mindari could not find a grip on her thoughts because there were too many thoughts happening all at once. It was like trying to catch water with their bare hands. "What is she?" One of the psychics screamed before Alara shot him through the throat. The remaining 2 Mindari fled to the far side of the arena, their minds scarred by the brief contact with human consciousness. They had touched something they did not understand, something wild and untamed that had evolved through millions of years of surviving a hostile planet. General Zorath watched from his throne with growing unease as the battle continued. His champions were dying at a rate that should have been impossible. The human was using the arena itself as a weapon, luring enemies into the plasma pits and the electrical towers and the shifting walls that crushed anything caught between them. "She fights like a cornered animal," observed Vexinar, the arena master who stood beside the throne. "I have never seen such desperate tactics." "No," Zorath replied slowly as his orange eyes tracked the human across the battlefield. "She does not fight like a cornered animal. A cornered animal fights to escape. This human fights to win. There is a difference that I am only now beginning to understand." On the arena floor, Alara paused behind a metal barrier to catch her breath and inject herself with a medical stim that would keep her muscles from failing. She had been fighting for 3 hours without rest, and her body was screaming for her to stop. But she could not stop because stopping meant dying. A Morvith hunter appeared behind her with its camouflage flickering as it prepared to strike. It thought it had been perfectly silent, perfectly invisible. But Alara had noticed the small dust particles moving in a pattern that did not match the airflow. She spun around and fired before the Morvith could react, and another champion fell to the arena floor. 70 of the 100 champions were now dead or dying. The remaining 30 began to change their strategy. They stopped attacking individually and started working together, coordinating their movements to trap the human in a closing circle. A Draxi warrior directed the formation while the others followed his commands. Alara saw what they were doing, and she knew she had to act quickly. She checked her equipment and found that she had only 12 explosives left and 2 magazines for her rifle and 3 knives. It was not enough to fight 30 enemies at once. So she did something that no enemy had ever done in the history of the Kethalar. She retreated. The alien champions cheered as they saw her running toward the edge of the arena. They believed she had finally given up, that the fear had finally broken her spirit. They chased after her with renewed energy, eager to claim the kill that would bring them glory. But Alara was not retreating out of fear. She was leading them exactly where she wanted them to go. The section of the arena she ran toward was marked with warning symbols in the Varth language. It was an area where the platforms were unstable and the environmental hazards were especially deadly. The Varith champions knew to avoid this section, but in their excitement to catch the fleeing human, they forgot to be careful. Alara jumped onto a floating platform and waited as the champions crowded onto the platforms around her. They surrounded her from all sides with weapons ready and victory in their eyes. "Nowhere to run now, human," shouted the Draxi commander. "Your tricks have finally failed you." Alara smiled, and something in that smile made the Draxi hesitate. She threw her remaining explosives in a pattern that seemed random, but was actually perfectly calculated. The explosions did not hit the champions directly, but instead destroyed the supports that held their platforms in place. The entire section of the arena collapsed into the plasma pit below. Alien champions screamed as they fell into the burning liquid that dissolved their bodies in seconds. The Draxi commander managed to grab onto a ledge, but Alara was there waiting with her last knife. "You should have been more careful," she said, before she kicked them into the flames. When the smoke cleared, only 12 champions remained standing in the arena. The crowd was completely silent now. No one was laughing anymore. They stared at the blood-covered human who stood alone on a platform surrounded by the bodies of their greatest warriors. General Zorath rose from his throne for the second time that day, and his face showed an emotion that his soldiers had never seen before. It was not anger or amusement or contempt. It was something close to fear. "This cannot be," he growled. "One human cannot defeat the champions of the Vareth Dominion. It is impossible." But the evidence was there before his eyes. Nearly 90 of his best warriors were dead, killed by a single creature from a planet they had expected to conquer without effort. Alara looked up at the general, and their eyes met across the arena. She was wounded in many places, and her breathing was heavy, and her combat suit was torn and burned. But she was still standing, and she was still ready to fight. "Come down here and see for yourself," she called out to him with blood dripping from a cut on her forehead. "Come see what one human can do." The remaining 12 champions looked at each other with uncertainty in their eyes. They had never known fear in battle before, but they knew it now. This human had killed their brothers and sisters with weapons and traps and bare hands, and she showed no signs of stopping. General Zorath felt something burning in his chest that he had not felt in centuries. It was the fire of a true challenge, the excitement of facing an enemy who might actually be able to defeat him. He reached for his ceremonial blade, and a smile crossed his scaled face. If the human wanted to fight him, then he would give her that honor. The final battle was about to begin. General Zorath Valkan descended from his throne with slow and deliberate steps that echoed through the silent arena. Every eye watched him as he walked toward the battlefield, where the blood of his fallen champions stained the metal floors. His forearms flexed, and his ceremonial blade hummed with plasma energy as he activated it for the first time in 20 years. "Enough of this farce," he announced in a voice that carried across the entire arena without the need for speakers. "I will end this myself and show the galaxy what happens to those who dare to challenge the Vareth Dominion." The remaining 12 champions stepped back to give their general room. They were relieved that someone else would finish this fight, because they had seen what this human could do, and they wanted no more part of it. Alara watched the massive alien approach, and she used a brief pause to assess her situation. Her left arm was broken and hung useless at her side. Plasma burns covered her torso and legs. Blood from various wounds ran down her face and made it hard to see. She had no more explosives and no more ammunition, and only one knife remaining. By any logical measure, she should surrender and hope for mercy. But Commander Alara Vance had not been chosen for this mission because she was logical. She had been chosen because she never, ever gave up. "You have impressed me, human," Zora said as he stopped 10 meters away from her. "I have conquered 200 star systems, and I have never seen a warrior fight as you have fought today. Tell me your name so that I may remember it." "Commander Alara Vance of Earth," she replied while her one good hand gripped her remaining knife. "Commander Vance," Zorath repeated with a respectful nod. I will give you an honorable death. This is more than most of my enemies receive." He charged forward with speed that seemed impossible for a creature his size. His forearms moved in a blur of motion, and his plasma blade cut through the air with a sound like screaming. Alara dove to the side, but she was too slow. The blade caught her across the back, and she felt burning pain as the plasma seared through her combat suit and into her flesh. She rolled and came up in a defensive stance despite the agony that threatened to overwhelm her. Zorath did not give her time to recover. He pressed his attack with blow after blow that she barely managed to avoid. She could not block his strikes because his strength would shatter her bones. She could not counterattack because his reach was too long and his blade was too fast. All she could do was survive, second by second, looking for an opening that might not exist. "Why do you continue to fight?" Zorath demanded as he knocked her to the ground with a backhand strike. "You cannot win. Your body is broken. Accept your fate with dignity." Alara pushed herself back to her feet, even though every movement sent waves of pain through her body. "Dignity is overrated," she gasped through bloodied lips. She threw her knife at his face, knowing he would block it. He did, and in that moment of distraction, she lunged forward and grabbed one of his lower arms. She twisted with all her remaining strength and felt something crack beneath his scales. Zorath roared in surprise and pain as he threw her across the arena. She hit a metal wall and crumpled to the ground, struggling to breathe with what felt like several broken ribs. "Clever," Zorath admitted as he looked at his injured arm. "You know exactly where to strike. Your scientists have studied us well, but knowledge will not save you." He crossed the distance between them in 3 massive strides and grabbed her by the throat with one of his upper arms. He lifted her off the ground until her feet dangled in the air and her face began to turn purple from lack of oxygen. "Look at you," he said, with something that sounded almost like sadness. "You have fought harder than any enemy I've ever faced, and yet you are just one human. What did your leaders think would happen when they sent you alone? Did they truly believe you could win?" Alara could not speak with his hand crushing her throat, but she managed to smile even as her vision began to darken around the edges. Zorath frowned at that smile. It was not the smile of someone who had accepted death. It was the smile of someone who knew something he did not. He loosened his grip just enough to let her speak. "What amuses you, human? You are about to die. You really do not understand," Alara rasped through her damaged throat. "You asked why Earth sent only one fighter. You called us cowards. You thought we were too afraid to face you." She coughed blood, but kept talking because she needed him to hear this before the end. "We sent one fighter because sending more would have been cruel." Zorath stared at her with confusion spreading across his scaled face. "Cruel? Cruel to whom?" "To your champions," Alara answered. "I killed nearly 100 of your best warriors by myself. Can you imagine what would have happened if we had sent 2, or 10, or 100 humans who fight the way I fight?" The realization hit Zorath like a physical blow, and he saw the truth in her dark eyes. Earth had not sent one fighter because they were weak. They had sent one fighter because they believed one fighter was enough. And they had been right. "What are you?" he whispered. "I am human," Alara replied. "We are survivors. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We fought predators and diseases and natural disasters, and worst of all, we fought each other. We are not the strongest or the fastest, but we are the most stubborn creatures in the entire universe." She grabbed the arm that held her throat with her one good hand and began to dig her fingers into the wound she had made earlier. Zorath hissed in pain but did not release her. "You conquer species that fight with honor," she continued. "You have never faced a species that fights to win, and that is your mistake." With a final burst of strength that she did not know she had, Elara drove her thumb into the nerve cluster of his injured arm. Zoreth roared and his grip loosened just enough for her to slip free. She fell to the ground and rolled as his blade sliced through the air where her head had been. Her hand found a shard of broken metal from the arena floor, a piece that had been torn loose during the earlier battle. Zoreth raised his blade for the killing strike. Elara saw the gap between the scales on his neck, a tiny vulnerable spot that no enemy had ever gotten close enough to target. She threw herself forward, under his swing, and drove the metal shard up into that gap with every ounce of strength left in her broken body. General Zoreth Vulcan, conqueror of 200 star systems, stopped moving. He looked down at the human who hung from the metal protruding from his neck. His orange eyes were wide with shock and something that might have been admiration. "Impossible," he whispered. "Nothing is impossible," Elara replied. "You just have to refuse to quit." Zoreth fell to his knees and then fell forward onto the arena floor. His body twitched once and then went still. The greatest general of the Vareth Dominion was dead, killed by a single human who would not accept defeat. Elara collapsed beside him, too exhausted to move, too damaged to stand. But she was alive. Against all odds, against every prediction, against the laughter of an entire galaxy, she was alive. The arena was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. The remaining 12 champions looked at their fallen general and then at the human who had killed him. Slowly, one by one, they dropped their weapons and sank to their knees in the ancient Vareth gesture of absolute surrender. "The Cathalar is complete," whispered Vexenar the arena master in a voice that trembled with shock. "The human has won." Far above the arena, the holographic screens broadcast everything to the watching galaxy. Species that had laughed at humanity hours ago now stared at their screens in stunned silence. A new power had emerged in the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again. Commander Elara Vance lay on the arena floor, surrounded by the bodies of fallen champions and the kneeling survivors who had surrendered to her. She could barely move, and every breath sent sharp pain through her broken ribs. Her vision blurred, and she wondered if this was what dying felt like. But she was not dying, not yet. Medical teams rushed into the arena from both sides, human and alien alike. The human retrieval team that had been waiting in orbit had received permission to dock the moment Zoreth fell. They reached Elara first and immediately began treating her wounds with advanced medical technology. "Stay with us, Commander," said Captain Torres as he injected her with emergency stabilizers. "You did it! You actually did it! The whole planet is watching." Elara tried to smile, but her face hurt too much. "Tell him I want a raise," she whispered before she lost consciousness. When she woke up 3 days later, she was in a hospital bed on the Conqueror's Pride, surrounded by machines that beeped and whirred as they monitored her recovery. Her body was wrapped in bandages, and her left arm was encased in a regeneration sleeve that would heal the broken bones. Admiral Chen Wei sat in a chair beside her bed with a look of pure joy on her face. "Welcome back, Commander," the Admiral said. "You have been asleep for quite a while. A lot has happened." "Did we win?" Elara asked, even though she already knew the answer. "You won," Admiral Chung corrected her. "The Vareth Dominion has officially surrendered to Earth under the terms of the Cathalar. Their entire fleet has withdrawn from our solar system, and their conquered worlds have been offered independence. We have received messages from over 50 alien civilizations requesting diplomatic relations." Elara closed her eyes and let out a long breath. It was over. The mission that everyone thought was suicide had actually succeeded. "There is something else," Admiral Chung continued with a mysterious smile. "The new leader of the Vareth Dominion has requested a meeting with you. Apparently, she is quite impressed with your performance." "She?" Elara repeated with surprise. General Zorath's daughter, Lyra Vel Khan. She is taking command of the Dominion following her father's death. She watched the entire battle, and she says she has never witnessed anything like it. She wants to discuss the future relationship between our peoples. Over the next several weeks, Elara recovered from her injuries while the galaxy reorganized itself around the shocking events of the Cathalar. News programs across known space played recordings of the battle over and over again, and analysts from every species tried to explain how a single human had defeated 100 champions. The explanations varied wildly. Some claimed that humans possessed secret psychic powers. Others believed that Earth had given her hidden technology or performance-enhancing drugs. A few conspiracy theorists suggested that the entire battle had been staged. But the truth was much simpler and much more terrifying. Humans were just really good at not dying. When Elara was well enough to walk, she attended the official ceremony where Earth and the Varith Dominion signed their treaty of peace. Lyra Velkan stood across from her, a younger version of her father, with the same black scales and orange eyes, but with a look of curiosity rather than contempt. "Commander Vance," Lyra said, as she extended one of her 4 hands in the human gesture of greeting. "My father underestimated your species. I will not make the same mistake. I hope we can be friends rather than enemies," Elara replied as she shook the alien hand. "Your father was a great warrior. I was honored to face him." "He would have respected you," Lyra admitted. "In his final moments, I believe he finally understood what humans truly are. You are not the strongest or the fastest, but you are something far more dangerous. You are unstoppable." The ceremony concluded with the signing of documents and the exchange of gifts. Lyra presented Elara with a small box that contained something wrapped in ceremonial cloth. "This belonged to my father," Lyra explained. "It is his ceremonial blade, cleaned and repaired. I have added an inscription in our language that I believe you will appreciate." Elara unwrapped the blade and studied the beautiful weapon that had nearly killed her. The Varith script along the blade spelled out words that Lyra translated for her. "To the warrior who would not fall, may your enemies always underestimate you." Elara bowed her head in respect and thanked Lyra for the incredible gift. She knew she would hang it in a place of honor for the rest of her life. 3 months later, Elara returned to her small apartment on Earth for the first time since the battle. She was a hero now, recognized everywhere she went, invited to speak at events and ceremonies around the world. But all she really wanted was some peace and quiet. She hung Zorath's blade on her wall, next to the worn paperback book she had carried into the arena. The book was The Art of War by Sun Tzu, an ancient text that had taught humans the principles of strategy and deception for thousands of years. She had brought it as a reminder of where human military thinking came from. The inscription on the blade caught the light as she stepped back to admire it. The weapon of her greatest enemy had become a symbol of her greatest victory. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a young officer holding a tablet with an urgent expression on his face. "Commander Vance," the officer said, "Admiral Chum sent me. There has been a development that requires your attention." Elara took the tablet and read the message. 3 more alien civilizations had arrived at Earth's doorstep, each requesting the right to challenge humanity under the Cathalar. Word of her victory had spread across the galaxy, and now everyone wanted to test themselves against the species that had defeated the Varith Dominion. Elara smiled as she handed the tablet back to the officer. "Tell the Admiral I will be there in 1 hour." She looked at Zorath's blade one more time and then began to gather her equipment. Earth needed its champion again, and she would not let them down. Across the galaxy, species that had once laughed at humanity now spoke of them with fear and respect. A new phrase had emerged in dozens of alien languages, a warning passed from traveler to traveler and from planet to planet. "Never fight a human. They do not know when to stop. And in the halls of power on countless worlds, leaders watched the recordings of the Cathalar battle and made very careful decisions about how they would treat the small blue planet called Earth. Some chose to become allies, eager to learn from humans and benefit from their friendship. Others chose to avoid Earth entirely, content to pretend that humans did not exist. And a few foolish ones chose to challenge humans, convinced that they would succeed where the Vareth had failed. Those foolish ones learned the same lesson that General Zorath had learned in his final moments. Humans were survivors, fighters, creatures forged by millions of years of struggle against a hostile universe. They were small and fragile and short-lived compared to most galactic species, but they possessed something that no other species had ever developed. They had the absolute, unshakable refusal to accept defeat. And that made them the most dangerous species in the entire galaxy. Commander Ilara Vance finished preparing her equipment and walked out of her apartment with her head held high. She did not know what challenges waited for her in the days ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever the galaxy threw at humanity, they would face it the way they had always faced their problems. They would fight, and they would survive, and they would win. Because that was what humans did. That was what they had always done. And that was what they would continue to do until the last star burned out and the universe itself came to an end. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and nothing would ever be the same again.